Of our four primary movement concepts, our starting point is space. This refers to the space we occupy while hooping, both with our bodies and by extension, our hoop.
Through exercises and instruction, this chapter will teach you to utilize space more effectively and bring greater awareness to the shapes created by both the hoop and your body.
Hoop dance can be an expression of how we experience the world. For the last 10 years, I've studied and practiced architecture, the art and science of designing space. This requires an acute awareness of how humans interact with their environment. Investing so much time reflecting on space has greatly impacted how I perceive the world. Constantly considering design principles such as scale, composition, harmony, and contrast. In thinking of the hoop as a tool that I can use to draw shapes, through my movement, I create lines, patterns, and three-dimensional forms. Space is often and usefully defined in terms of dimensions. Although we often think of our life in a linear fashion, with the future before us and the past behind, we also exist in every moment in a three-dimensional landscape, defined by length, width, and depth. To illustrate, if we consider a single point without size, this point has no dimensions. If we then introduce a second point and connect these 2 points with a line, we now have a one-dimensional line. It has the dimension of length. As soon as we introduce a third point, we've defined a two-dimensional plane. In relation to hoop dance, defining this two-dimensional plane is often the focus when hooping off the body or performing for an audience. In this mindset, we can consider the patterns that we create as similar to drawing on a sheet of paper. Once we consider the third dimension, which is the depth of the two-dimensional field, we begin exploring 3D space, which is the space we experience in our day-to-day lives. When moving intentionally in three-dimensional space, we can create volumes. Within the concept of space, we'll apply the related ideas of planes, isolation, scale, and 3D shapes to the creation of hoop movement.
The following moves are primarily illustrating terminology related to spinning the hoop on our hands. Let's begin with the wall plane. The wall plane is the vertical plane parallel to our torso in front of us or behind us. So there are two wall planes: the front wall plane and the back wall plane. When we spin the hoop parallel to our torso on either side of our body, we call this the wheel plane. There are also two wheel planes: the left wheel plane and the right wheel plane, just like the wheels on a car. The floor plane is parallel to the ground. When we're spinning the hoop on our waist, the hoop is in the floor plane. Also, when we spin the hoop overhead, this is called the floor plane, as it is parallel to the floor. If you perform hooping in front of an audience, planes are especially important to be aware of. Consider how the plane and angle of your hoop will appear to the viewer. Use your stage space and orientation to the audience to make your performance more dramatic and visually appealing. A plane that is parallel to the audience is often the most dramatic. Playing with planes and angles in front of a mirror is a good way to find out which orientation your audience will enjoy most.
Isolations create an optical illusion by defining a fixed point in relation to a frame of reference. The motion of the hoop around a fixed point brings awareness to that point. This creates an illusion where the hoop appears to float in space.
There are three main variants of an isolation that we can accomplish with a hoop. The first type is a center point isolation.
A center point isolation is the isolation most often performed with the hoop. In a center point isolation, there's actually no portion of the hoop that remains stationary, but the visual effect and illusion is that the hoop is stationary, as though it's rotating around the stillness at the center of a wheel. In this instance, the actual isolated location is the center of rotation. The center of rotation is the point fixed in space relative to the body or audience. We can also isolate the hoop around any point on the hoop. We call this a point-on-hoop isolation. In this case, a single point on the hoop remains fixed in space. The rest of the hoop rotates about that point. This can be done in plane or out of plane. In a two-point isolation, 2 points on the hoop remain fixed in space while the hoop rotates around these 2 points. This creates an axis around which the hoop rotates. This is also called an axial isolation. The axis of rotation can be horizontal, vertical, or on angle. In axial isolations, the hoop is creating a three-dimensional shape, a sphere.
The first isolation that we'll introduce is a two-hand inside isolation. This isolation allows you to maintain contact with the hoop through the entire isolation. Before beginning, it helps to close your eyes and imagine a fixed ring floating in space in front of you, equal in size to your hoop. We'll be calling this imaginary ring your base isolation ring or base ring. Also imagine a stationary point floating in the middle of that ring. This is the center of rotation. Fix these images in your mind. Your base ring is a conceptual reference for the path of your isolation. We'll start with both hands at 6 o'clock with an inside grip, palms facing down, thumbs together. Begin your rotation in the clockwise direction. As your hands approach the 9 o'clock position, you'll begin feeling tension in your leading arm, your left. Release the hoop from your leading hand and regrip in the trailing position, your palms facing your body, pinkies together, forearms parallel. Once you reach the 3 o'clock position, you'll begin to feel tension in your leading arm again, this time your right arm. Release with your leading hand, then regrip in the trailing position, palms facing your body, thumbs together. As you continue following the base isolation ring back through the 6 o'clock position, you've completed one isolated rotation. It's important to keep in mind that your hands need to be tracing the imaginary base ring through the entire rotation in order to cleanly isolate the hoop. The most common cause of a wonky isolation is that the person is tracing a path larger or smaller than their hoop. Try without a hoop if you're having a hard time. At any point in an isolation, the counterpoint should be directly across from your point of contact and intersecting the center of rotation. If my point of contact is at 3 o'clock, my counterpoint should be at 9. Keeping a soft focus on the top edge of your hoop can be helpful. Try completing an isolation while maintaining that awareness. You will likely realize that the hoop is not following a perfect path and that it's falling in and out of alignment with your base ring. If your hoop, and by extension your base ring, are larger than your arms can reach, it will be impossible for you to do a clean isolation. Hence, isolations are often more easily performed with a smaller diameter hoop. We recommend learning and practicing isolations in front of a mirror, as it can be challenging to see how precise your movement is without one. On a sunny day, your shadow is a useful substitute for a mirror. Practice slowly. Doing this will help you consciously maintain a clean isolation. And since you have both hands on the hoop, this allows additional control, enabling you to stop at any point and change direction without too much strain on your wrists. Isolations take time and practice to perfect, so be patient with yourself in the learning process.
A one-hand inside isolation is what most think of when they first imagine an isolation with a hoop. Although it's often the isolation one learns first, this variant is significantly more challenging to perform with